Winter Watercolor Silhouette with Ms.Boley. So we're doing this so we can learn about a specific watercolor technique called wet on wet. We're also learning about drawing a silhouette and also a little bit about color theory. So some of the materials you're going to need are a pencil and eraser. You'll need your watercolor paints and a brush or brushes. If you have watercolor paper, that would be awesome. If you don't, you can just use your visual journal. If you have salt, that's again optional. And an animal template to trace. You'll see why in just a second, and that is optional. You are welcome to draw your own animal if you like. Are you ready? Okay, let's get started. So first of all, we need to know what is a silhouette. I think of a silhouette as basically an outline. In real life, we would see a silhouette when the light is right behind the subject that we're looking at. And so we don't see any detail on it at all. It just sort of almost looks like a shadow. A silhouette is when we represent an object, a person, an animal, or a scene just as a solid shape. And oftentimes it's a black shape, but in this case, we're gonna do a silhouette slightly differently. All right, so I'm gonna draw a silhouette of an animal. I'm doing a winter animal. I decided to draw a moose. So I'm drawing my own silhouette. If you would rather print one out and trace it, you are welcome to do that. So what I'm doing is, you all remember how I've shown how to use shapes to create the basic form of something. So that's what I'm doing. I'm using just rectangles to block in the basic form of the moose. Once I have it all blocked in and I know it's going to fit on my page, then I'm gonna go and do the outline around the edges of the moose. I'm trying not to press too hard because I don't really want this outline to be visible. I'm actually going to end up erasing it and making it as light as I possibly can afterwards. Almost done. Now I just have to add the antlers. And as you know, as I always recommend, I'm looking at a reference image of a moose. I don't really know what a moose looks like well enough to draw one without looking at an image. So I strongly suggest looking online at Google Images for an image of whichever animal you decide to draw. So now what I'm doing is I'm just lightening up my pencil lines by erasing. All right, with watercolors, we want to start out by creating a wash. So I have this plastic palette. It's actually just a lid from a takeout container. And I've put a puddle of water on top of that lid. And now I've added some watercolor paint to my water puddle. So I'm adding paint to my water puddle. This is how we mix washes in watercolor. Now I'm going to do the same process, making a puddle and adding paint to the puddle, but I'm going to just use a different color. And I'm trying my best not to let the two washes mix together so that I have two washes of two different colors. Okay, let's review a little bit of color theory. So as I think we're aware, if we mix complementary colors together, so orange and blue, yellow and purple, or red and green, our resulting color that we'll get is brown. So I know that some of us might be tempted to mix red and green together for this painting. Unless you want to get brown, we want to avoid We want to avoid mixing those. So just avoid using complementary colors as your 2 washes, unless you want brown. Maybe you do. Maybe that's an intentional choice on your part. All right, so now that I have my 2 washes, what I'm going to do is I'm using my brush and I've dipped into my water. And now what I'm doing is I'm painting water all over the inside of the silhouette of my moose. I'm not painting it, I'm just using water to fill in all of the area inside of the moose. I'm trying to work sort of quickly because I don't want the water to dry, but I also want to be careful because wherever I have water is where the watercolor paint is going to go. So I'm going to try my best to sort of like stay in the lines of my silhouette, but also being aware that if I take a really long time, the water is going to dry up. A really good tip for painting and just in general is that if you are finding it difficult with your larger brush, switch to a smaller brush. So just make sure that the tool that you're using is appropriate for the job that you are doing. So right now I have switched to a smaller brush. Okay, this is where the exciting magic stuff happens. So now I'm going to take the washes I've mixed and I'm going to just gently do sort of some dots of wash. And because I've painted water underneath, they're just going to explode and they're going to go outward and they're going to mix with the water and create a really cool effect. Here, let me show you close up. So here we go. Wow. So I just find it really fun to just watch the paint mixing with the water. It looks really cool. So I'm just going to continue doing that process, adding paint into where I painted water on my page. And if I feel like I want a little bit darker than what I actually have on my wash, on my palette, then I can actually dip right into my watercolor paints. See, like what I'm doing here. And right now, I've actually realized that I think my water has dried up because I'm not seeing that mixing effect happening. So all I've done is I've just dipped into my water cup and added more water. So you can continue adding more water until you feel like you're done. So that's what I'm going to do for a little while. So another watercolor technique is to add salt. So if you have salt, you can sprinkle it into some areas of your painting. And what the salt does is it absorbs the water from the paint and it creates these little dots. It creates a really cool texture. It's hard to describe. You'll see it later. So drop the salt on it and let it dry. If you don't have any salt, you can create the same effect with a brush. If you just make sure your brush is super dry, a watercolor brush can soak up some of the paint and sort of create a similar texture to the salt. So no worries, the salt is optional. So one other thing I wanted to talk about in this video is brush care. So as you'll see, I left my brush in the water. You're not really supposed to let your brushes sit in water like that. Letting it sit, while you're working for like an hour is probably fine, but if you let it sit for a long period of time, the bristles can get curved because they're getting bent in the bottom of the cup. So just make sure you wash your brushes either in the water cup or in the sink, and you dry them off when you're done. Okay, now I've let my painting dry, and what I'm doing here is I'm brushing off the salt, and you'll see a close-up in just a second of what the salt actually does to the paint. So make sure you brush the salt off. And there you go. You see those circular areas, sort of? Those are from the salt. Alright, and that is how we create our winter animal watercolor wet on wet silhouettes. Happy creating! Here's some ideas for different silhouettes for kind of winter theme. But, maybe you don't want to limit yourself to winter theme. Maybe you want to do a different type of animal silhouette, and that is completely fine. You can be creative with this. Alright, and that is it. I hope you had fun, and thanks for watching.